Get set here. I'm going to comment on something I've postponed out of mourning for an absolute hatter job that was done to Professor Dugan. I have no desire to darken his memory with the context it happened in for me. But I admire Professor Dugan, that's obvious. And I have no direct opinion about Alexander Dugan, except that I've observed academic discourtesy towards him. One of the challenging issues that's risen in philosophy has to do with words and their definitions as a result of being from different cultures. And Alexander Dugan is not guilty of discourtesy. When he uses words that he has understood to be confusing to the Western interpretation, he patiently explains what he means by those words in the context people were hearing them in, so that it's possible to use the same words with a different cultural vocabulary. He's a genuine teacher, in other words. And he was engaged in a discussion with a circus of intellectual bullies from the West. And he tried to explain to them what something meant in Russian, which is crucial to understanding and appreciating and respecting his mind and his presence. He was there. He was present. And he was participating. And without even bothering to understand what Professor Dugan was saying, the man took his own interpretation and said, "Who cares?" Now, I don't want to perpetuate academic discourtesy. God forbid that I would perpetuate personal discourtesy. I do not want to perpetuate academic discourtesy. I asked a physics professor something that was at my level of understanding of physics, and he tapped his foot very impatiently, and it was understandable. It was between classes, however, so he indulged me with a very crisp clip and goodbye answer. That's understandable. I'm not in physics. Alexander Dugan is in philosophy. There are some polemics that he engages in a way that I find charming concerning American politics, and so does Putin. I personally find the diplomatic orientation of Putin, Lavrov, Dugan, and the others, the UN ambassador, engaging. If they're being deceptive, it's lost on me. Now, I have been considered blameworthy by the Bush administration, whoever it was who said, this is an object lesson. We anticipate what his arguments will be. He's going to be soft on communism. And he will grow into his rule. He will discover the answers to his own misguided beliefs. And it's an academic problem in the West. I would like to believe that Alexander Dugin had nothing to do with that. But as the villain of modernity, Ayn Rand described Mallory refusing to allow Howard Roark in the door at first. He said, I want to be sick every time I see one of your buildings because you can't possibly live up to what I respect about you, which is your work. I don't want to find out that. I would rather believe that Professor Dugin would understand that I was just a child. But making me blameworthy of things is a kick for the federal establishment. I'd like to steer away from that too. Out of academic courtesy, I didn't impose myself on a postdoctoral level Russian philosopher as a graduate from a community college. Now, the polemics I'm talking about intrude mostly during introductory space on the dialogues that are online with regard to Alexander Dugin. I'll take a couple of examples, quick examples, to show why I decided to make this orientation to my own opinion about Professor Dugin, which isn't political, but I have of politics. And Putin once said something about common ground. It was a reference to Jesse Jackson's movement, and I was applauding him for doing that. It's very difficult to see other than through the lens of antagonism for the neocons and the neoliberal establishment and Hillary Clinton's presumptions, how Professor Dugin can both reach out to the Rainbow Coalition and applaud Donald Trump. There must be something, it seems to me, that he misunderstands about the pragmatism that he applauds. But I think the way to go about looking at that is not by creating friction through ordeals, which is what these perpetrators in America are doing to me in the psychology of their approach to creating a dialogue, which is just between a student and professor at the very best. So if he is in the realm of species who have loaded arguments about me, I'd really rather not know. And that's another reason why I try to back off. I'm very curious. He's a brilliant professor. And the things that he says stick in memory as challenges that seem worthwhile to understanding. But certain academic questions come to mind. I don't like the brokerage in media, but they don't have to do with the philosophical questions. The brokerage in media is the idea that political correctness means accept or you die, or that there's some kind of Punisher of karma theorem behind the movement that tortured me and promoted Neva pornographic in an elementary school and sees only sin in sex and not an absence of a regulatory agency, which I believe we need over Hollywood generally, not just in smut. But the issues in academics eventually come out. And there are two questions I would have from what I've heard of Professor Dugin as a novice to the issues that he's raising. One of them is if the Enlightenment and modernity is, as you say, Professor Dugin, an error from the start. Could you explain who you see Erasmus as and what his role in the church was? because he began, in some ways, the Enlightenment by bringing an end to the Dark Ages through the restoration of the Greeks who had been preserved thanks to Muslim culture. My second question is, when you make an argument for multiplicity in cultural affairs, I do happen to entirely agree with you. I believe that comedy comes from understanding, meaning the courtesy of seeing the other person's point of view and understanding it to help keep each other safe. I don't want to embark on the mean-spirited business of discussing what happened in the Ukraine. Enough should be known to my comments in support of Jeffrey Sachs and RFK Jr. to ascertain how I feel about that. But I do wonder if you're saying that Galileo was a mistake, that he should have cooperated with the idea that the sun orbits the earth because of its deity centrism and putting the human soul first, its relationship to God. And I'd like, I'm sure he has a clear explanation for those issues. And it would be probably like halting a physics professor between classes and asking him a question that's out of line because I didn't have the courage to take the course where it was already explained. So I consider it academic realism, where I stand from the point of view of what I understand. Does any word of caution I would extend? It's the idea of being accepting. I don't believe he's happy that he's a demon to the West. I don't believe that. He's too sensitive a man to be happy about something like that. But the West loves demons. And he's right if he thinks it gives them currency. And Foucault was such a person. He was a demon to the academic standard that made him a guru of a cult. I want to make sure that I clarify something. I don't see Professor Alexander Dugin as a guru of a cult. I see him as a victim of misrepresentation. That's just my opinion. But it is my opinion.